All right, so we left off on Friday talking about, actually, Tanger, can you get the right light? Thanks. We left off on Friday talking about one of the most important stirrings in World War I, prompting the U.S. to intervene, which was the attacks on both British and Allied ships in the Atlantic and the Channel, as well as the American ships. Like, what was the one example of the ship I taught you, the American merchant ship that was sank by an undersea boat? Ryan? Yeah, the Fry. And then we talked also about the Sussex, there's that word again, Sussex Pledge, which was an American ship that was also torpedoed by a German U-boat. However, no one died in the Sussex ship, but it prompted Germany to recognize, at least temporarily, a Sussex Pledge. And so, heading into 1916, the real issue in the presidential election was, would America remain on a path towards neutrality? Or would the United States take a turn towards the war? So while the U-boat attacks continue to rage, Woodrow Wilson was gearing up for a re-election. And so I brought in today just some buttons and campaign propaganda that I fished off the internet for Wilson's re-election campaign. You can kind of get a sense of what Wilson was campaigning based upon. Especially look at the second, this one, and here. I like this one. It's kind of a neat one. But what do you think the main agenda for 1916 for Woodrow Wilson was? Brian? Neutrality. Pledging to continue to keep the United States out of the war. War in Europe, peace in America, God bless Wilson. And then this one. He proved the pen was mightier than the sword. So Wilson was going to be tested. And that's kind of the theme heading into his second term. It would really be tested whether or not neutrality could remain a theme for the United States moving into his second term as president. And the reality is, Wilson pretty much handily defeated Charles Hughes, the Republican candidate. Yes, that's Charles Hughes, your favorite 1916 presidential loser. Really, there should be a capstone one year on losers of the presidential elections. The poor guys. I mean, think about it. You got all the way to the presidency election, and then you just get forgotten. But yet, think about how few people in U.S. history actually get to that stage. The exact same number as there are presidents. And we always forget who the first runner-up is. Regardless, Wilson pretty handedly wins the election here, despite the fact the popular vote was pretty close. Pretty close. The popular vote was really close. And as was the electoral vote. Actually, I should say he handily won there. And that was, again, due to the fact Republicans had such a strong base in the northern states, which tended to be more populated. So Wilson somewhat narrowly escapes defeat heading into 1916. Yeah?
Was this the first election where all the states in the nation?
Yeah. Yep. Zona, New Mexico. Getting in on the action. Oklahoma. So yeah, this is the first election in U.S. history where all 48 continental states participated. Pretty neat. Pretty neat. But as I mentioned, whether or not Wilson can keep the United States out of the war proved to be his biggest test heading into his second term. And again, remember, when you take on an even year, you always get elected, or you always take office in the odd year, right? That's how it works. But I'm wondering if you can pick up, looks like there's like a note. Could you grab that? Is somebody passing notes? Preston, seriously? Whoa, you don't get to do that. That's my job. I've always wanted to do this. This is one of those like teacher things, like in movies and stuff. They catch people passing notes, and I don't know. I'll have to go back to the camera evidence to see if you were passing notes, Preston. Or I just read the content.
Do it.
It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on YouTube. This is going viral, Preston. Dear Matika, can you believe Mr. Smith is wearing that hideous tie? Actually, Esther, why don't you read what this says? Listen carefully. Esther's going to break this note that Preston passed to the
We intend to begin on the 1st of February, unrestricted submarine. We shall endeavor in spite of this to keep the United States of America neutral. In the event of this not succeeding, we make Mexico a proposal or alliance on the following basis. Make war together, make peace together, generous financial support, and an understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona.
All right, thank you. Preston, wow, you and Ratika are really hatching plans. No, I set that one up, obviously. Because, now it's just obviously on video, and the world will see how lame and cheesy I am. No, the contents of my fake note were not, in fact, anything about my tie or my appearance, but instead, the contents of the note contained the secret message sent from Preston, aka Germany, to Ratika, aka Mexico. Now, years ago when I first started teaching this event that's known as the Zimmerman Telegraph, students had a hard time understanding why Germany would be trying to rile up Mexico here, right in the thick of World War I. But that was in the infancy of my teaching years, and that's before I started stressing how important the tension between the United States and Mexico really was heading into the World War I. And when you go back to last week, and on the video that I posted, and also the reading about the situation in Mexico with the United States, now perhaps it makes clearer sense why this message passed clandestinely between the German government and the Mexican government so incensed and enraged the United States that when the letter was finally made public in March 1st, 1917, the Zimmerman Telegraph, as it became known as, sent off shockwaves throughout the United States. And I know we didn't finish reading the contents of the letter. And I'm guessing you guys probably touched upon this in Euro a little bit? Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty widely circulated document. Because ultimately, a lot of people think this is the push. This was the one push that brought the United States into the war. And that's partly true. The U-boat warfare, without hesitation, was one of the most significant factors getting the United States involved in the war. However, the note that was uncovered, which does anybody know who actually passed this on to the American government? We didn't intercept it. We, of course, I mean the United States. The United States didn't intercept this note. Robert?
Wasn't it Britain?
Yes, Great Britain. Britain, in fact, intercepted this note in January, deciphered the code, which this is actually the original code. So using sort of numerical code for words. So Britain intercepted this, held on to it for a bit, and then made Wilson knowledgeable of it in February of 1917. And then the news went to the American public. But the key, I mean, what about this document do you think most incensed Americans? What specific part of the text do you think most riled up the United States people? All right, we'll start with Ted.
Yeah, Mexico is to reconquer their lost territory.
And that was a reference to what? What we learned already this year that Germany was tapping into. Yeah, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo from the Mexican-American War, precisely. The fact is that the Germans were telling Mexico, listen, you know, hey, if we join up teams here and we ally through this war, we'll eventually perhaps help you reconquer the territory that you lost in previous wars with the United States. So anytime you have talk of reconquest, that can be considered quite bellicose. That can be considered quite an aggressive movement by the Germans, provoking the American government. Anna, you had your hand up. Did you see a different part of the passage that you perceived to be more hostile?
I think for the unrestricted submarine warfare part, since they already had the Sussex pledge, were they going to just ignore the pledge and then just without any notice resume?
Yes. Yeah, that's a clue to the intentions of the Germans breaking the pledge. Perfect. Peanut butter stuck in my roof of my mouth. It's
I'm
just
sorry.
a good lesson out there to fellow teachers. Don't eat peanut butter if you try to teach at the same time. Yeah, the Sussex Pledge. The Germans are going to reignite the U-boat attacks. So they're going to break the pledge that they made in 1916. So maybe that tapped back into the psychology of the American public, and the fear of being attacked on the open seas. Nikosh, another thought?
Yeah, the second sentence of the letter says this: "We shall endeavor, in spite of this, to keep the United States of America neutral." So, was Germany helping, even though they attacked the U.S. with the submarines? The U.S. would still be neutral, even though they were being attacked.
Very good point. Very good point. This is somewhat of a tough egg to crack in this passage. The Americans perceive this as hostility. There's no doubt about that. And this is going to, in the short term, a month later, prompt Wilson to ask Congress to go to war. But you see, the Germans thought of this differently. The Germans look at this whole business with the Zimmerman Telegraph as they were actually trying not to arouse the United States, not to drive the Americans into the war, because Germany knew full well. By 1917, the war was starting to wear down the Europeans. And if the United States jumped on board, the Germans knew that was it. They'd eventually lose the war. And they were right, of course. So they were actually trying not to incite any kind of American action with this letter. It was supposed to be clandestine, it's supposed to be secret. But we have to give a nod to our British allies here who cracked the code, which would not be the only great code cracking feat between the British and Germans, of course, in the 1940s, World War II, breaking the Enigma code. And there was the movie last year, Imitation Game of Alan Turing, which was one of the arguably most important aspects of World War II. So code breaking even existed back in World War I. Cryptologists, and I tell you, with your guys' math skills and you could be cryptologist, quite successful one maybe someday. I don't know. But definitely not Preston, because he let that note to Retika fall in bad hands. So Preston, I don't know. Preston, it's like the love of the theatrics, all right? You're not being indicted on charges. Regardless, here's what's undeniable. Psychologically, the Zimmerman Telegraph changed how a lot of Americans viewed the war. Because now there was an act of hostility that went beyond just the U-boat attacks. Max Bannister, I told you the other day, he made up a point in the third hour, that the average Americans probably were pretty okay with Wilson being neutral to start the war, because it was so far removed. Well, after years of constant U-boat attacking, and now you get this actual provocation, it seems, from the Zimmerman Telegraph, the majority of Americans at this point started to champion the idea that war was inevitable. That war was inevitable, especially now that Germany's bringing it right to the United States' backyard. And so, despite Germany's idea that continuing the warfare, the submarine warfare, would bring England to its knees, the opposite effect occurs. Because on April 6, 1917, Woodrow Wilson asks Congress formally to declare war on Germany. 1 cent in the newspaper, look at that. 1 cent.
Back then, wasn't 1 cent worth a lot more than now?
I mean, yes, of course. The value of money has changed, but I don't know exactly what 1 cent is equivalent to. Somebody can check it out for homework tonight. It's got the votes in there. So in the House, 373 to 50, and in the Senate, 82 to 6. So a pretty overwhelming majority of people supported Wilson's request. And we're going to look at actually part of his speech to Congress in a minute. So you guys will get a chance to see how his rhetoric changes from the neutrality speech he gave in 1914. Somebody had a question in the back? Yeah.
So if Germany specifically wanted to keep the U.S. out of the war, why didn't they go to the U.S. directly with diplomacy? Like we were talking about how the U.S. had large German population.
Sure.
that were kind of obviously like anti-war.
Yeah, the immigrant stance was one of the reasons why Wilson asked the United States to remain neutral.
So then why would Germany go ahead with this propagation?
You mean like after the Zimmerman Telegram came out?
No, why did they try to ally with Mexico instead of the U.S. in the first place? What closed the U.S. off to diplomatic relations with Germany?
Well, the United States didn't cut off diplomatic relations with Germany until it declared war. But the motivation for gaining an alliance with Mexico, that motivation stemmed from a much bigger picture than just Europe. The Germans fully believed that if the war had turned, if they were able to defeat England, that perhaps by allying with Mexico, it would strengthen Germany's position in the Western Hemisphere. So by gaining an alliance with Mexico, they were hoping to strengthen their position on our side of the world.
Yeah, but if they got America on their side, wouldn't that have been a lot better?
Well, again, remember, the United States was not supporting Germany in any way at this point because of the U-boat attacks. With those U-boat attacks, we ever so closely moved further and further and further away from siding with Germany. That ship had sailed when the U-boat attacks began to really ramp up. Why did the Germans try to form an alliance at the beginning of the war? Well, most likely they were probably just too busy fighting the war itself. But the U-boat attacks, again, if you really have to come up with one solid reason that most prompted U.S. intervention, the U-boat attacks, because they were so consistent, they became front page news. The Zimmerman Telegram was like the last push. But it is strange if it was the intentions of the Germans to keep the United States, why they would go to Mexico. And by the way, Barbara Tuchman, You Write Guns to August, she actually wrote another book on World War II on the Zimmerman Telegram. And she wrote an entire book about that situation and how it erupted. So I haven't read that yet, but I do know she has written a book on that. So maybe that's one for you guys to check out. All right, so let's take a peek at Woodrow Wilson's Declaration of War speech, asking Congress for permission, of course. And we'll kind of pick up on the tone here. I have two colors outlined, so we'll get two readers on this, please. I should start doing this more often. That way it's easy to see where you break off. All right, Ankit, and we'll go with Irene. So Ankit, why don't you take the red, Irene, you can do blue.
It is a distressing and oppressive duty, gentlemen of the Congress, which I have performed in thus addressing you. There are, it may be, many months of fiery trial and sacrifice ahead of us. It is a fearful thing to lead this great peaceful people into war, and into the most terrible and disastrous of all wars, civilization itself seeming to be in the balance. But the right is more precious than peace, and we shall fight for the things which we have always carried nearest in our hearts.
For democracy, for the right of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their own governments, for the rights and liberties of small nations, for a universal dominion of right by such a concert of free peoples as shall bring peace and safety to all nations and make the world itself at last free. To such a task we can dedicate our lives and our fortunes, everything that we are and everything that we have, with the pride of those who know that the day has come when America is privileged to spend her blood and her might for the principles that give
Her might.
her might for the principles that gave her birth and happiness and the peace which she has treasured. God helping her, she can do no other.
All right, thank you. So like before, quick breakdown of the text here. What are the reasons Wilson gives for now asking Congress to go to war? What's he justifying his request on? Ratika?
He believes that people's rights should be protected in all terms, and so that's why they'll go out.
Okay, the protection of individual rights, natural rights. So that's cause for the United States to go out and protect those rights. Okay, it's made pretty obvious in there. JYK.
Wilson believes that America is one of the biggest guardians of democracy and liberties of other less powerful nations. So it's kind of a big brother thing.
Kind of like a what?
Like they're trying to act like a parent or like a big brother. We gotta help them out, right?
Okay. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So, and we talked about this before during imperialism. which president sort of put the United States in this role as like the world's police in a way? Yeah, Theodore Roosevelt. So perhaps it's sort of stemming from that perspective that the United States is the world's police force. That we have to protect the little guy. Yeah, Nakash, what do you think?
Going off what Jay said, later on he says to make the world itself at last free. So he believes by participating in war, they'll protect the smaller nations and they'll make the world free.
Yeah, and free of what, though? I mean, this is an interesting question. Wilson sort of paints the picture here for us, but what are we essentially free of what? You raise a good point, Nakash. Well, what do you guys think he's ultimately trying to rid the world of? Here's the line from Nakash. For a universal dominion of right by such a concert of free peoples as shall bring peace and safety to all nations and make the world itself at last free. But here's the question, free of what? Madana? Violence and bloodshed, okay. Free of violence and bloodshed, that could work. But who's the oppressive government? Who are we declaring war on? Okay. But here's the thing. Ask yourself this question. If you're going to claim that Germany is an oppressive government, what did we learn from last week about how the whole war broke out? Was Germany acting like an oppressive government? Was it oppressing its people? Not really. Is this the case of Germany trying to build a large empire and subjugate millions of people under their rule, like it was in World War II? Not really. Was Germany the first nation to strike? Yeah. We know that the Schleifen Plan called for the invasion of Belgium and Luxembourg to get to France. But this is the question I always get at. Free of what? And I'm not saying you're wrong, but the oppressive part, you've got to ask yourself, who was Germany really oppressing? I suppose. Rochelle, what do you say?
I would say free of colonialism.
Free of colonialism?
Yeah.
Okay. Where do you get that from?
Because I guess like a lot of European monarchs still had colonies like overseas in other parts of the world. So, like to free them and like give birth to new small nations.
So by the United States intervening, it's going to free all of the peoples around the world from colonialism, including the Filipinos and the United States and colonized themselves? No, I'm just asking you to consider that. I'm not saying you're wrong. I mean, it's an open-ended question here. Yeah, last point on this, I want to keep moving this forward.
Free to travel in the Atlantic without just like getting fear of being attacked.
Okay. We're fighting this war for fear of open seas. But I don't know what he intended. I mean, I can't ask Woody, hey Woody, what you mean there, man? Come help us out. I don't know. But the point is this. The rhetoric he chooses levels and lays very heavy on the idea of protecting democracy, protecting rights. But I just have to ask you to think about what this war was fought over. This was not a World War II situation where totalitarian governments were subjecting millions of people to rape and torture and murder and oppression of rights. The German government was not in that position in this war. This is a war that started over all of the alliances and nationalistic fervor that was rampant in Europe. But what the United States is intervening on behalf of, you see, Wilson now has to get ready. Because if you're the president, you're going to deliver a rhetorical speech that harps upon American values. Because now what's your greatest challenge as president? You deliver this speech on April 6th. What's your biggest question mark on April 7th? I wish, next year in the capstone, there's like a no hand rule. Right? You just don't raise hands. You just talk. But, this is got to sort of build up. You got to earn that right, Shep. You know what I'm saying? What's the president's biggest question mark on April 7th? Suleiman? Well, okay, before you go out, you're going to win the war. Ryan? Did they listen? Dude, they're Congress. You're up there in front of them.
Listen to what I meant.
Well,
Listen to my argument.
okay, well, yeah, but Congress says, okay, Wilson, we're behind you. So we know they listen. Guys, think about this. Oh, I'm getting this, my arm's gonna like if I do this big demonstrative display of enthusiasm, they'll call me. So okay, Anna, it's your turn.
Does it have to rally the army and like the logistics of sending them all the way
Yeah, how the heck are we going to get ready to fight when we've been talking about neutrality for the last 4 years? Is that what you're going to say? Right. All right, so you declare war, and you make this bastion of democracy speech, fight to free everybody, but how about that? You got 100,000 volunteer troops. That's your entire army. That's it. And you're going to get them all across the ocean, through the U-boat attacks, and into France, where the trench warfare has killed millions to this point. The worst carnage in history. This is what you're asking America to charge off into. Perhaps that's why he's so lamenting this position in the opening statement. It is a distressing and oppressive duty that I have to come before you to ask for this. Now, Wilson knew what he was getting America into. Everybody knew at this point what World War I had turned into. The most brutal example of tactics behind the technology in modern warfare history. He knew what the United States was getting into. Now the question is, how do we get ready to fight? How do we actually go over there and put our money where our mouth is? Because as I mentioned, the United States in 1916 had a 100,000 person volunteer army. And they're going to go on and fight in the greatest war ever fought to this point in human history. So how do you do that? How does, as a government, you transform your society into a peaceful society, into a neutral society, into a society at war? What's one of the first steps you have to do? Nelto, what do you think? What are some of the steps you got to take to get to war? Transform your nation. Okay, you've got to convert the economy into a wartime economy. Good point. We'll be getting to that momentarily. Okay, you got to build an army. You can't go over there in the trench with 100,000 guys, considering the British lost 100,000 in one day at the Somme. Yeah, it goes back to No-Phil's point about converting the economy into a wartime economy. But, again, there's 2 points I want to bring up. We haven't hit yet. The tactics are, you're in a trench. Go get the other guy out of this trench. No, really, that was World War I. How do you get them out of the trench? You're going to drop gas on them, you drop artillery. I mean, that's probably the least of the Americans' concerns on the first couple days after. But it's a good idea, and the Americans would change some of the tactics in the war. They would. Yeah.
Where they're going to go?
Well, they're going to France. They're going to France.
Transporting the troops.
Okay, it goes into logistics. I'm going to help expedite this, and so I'll tell you real quick. First of all, one of the ideas is here and here. How are you going to pay for the war? How are you going to pay for the war? This is going to cost a lot of money. And up here, how are you going to convince a nation of peacetime people to get ready to go to war, to give up their rights to go fight for these Europeans? Yeah.
Maybe like glorify war, so people want to fight.
The propaganda campaign that was launched by the United States government to get the American people ready to fight in Europe was one of the most unprecedented propaganda campaigns in this country's history. Propaganda for the Civil War existed, but not quite to the feverish pitch that it rose in World War I. Just keep in mind what we've been talking about. Since 1914, the American people had thought they were going to steer clear of this war. And now the president has asked Congress, and Congress obliged, and now the United States is going to have to gear up and go fight in the trenches. So how can you convince people? How do you convince people that this is the noble cause to undertake? Well, you've got Wilson's speech, but then the propaganda campaign. To convince a peacetime country to get ready for war requires an unbelievable amount of movement in psychology. And so something as little as posters to create a narrative about the war, to speak to the people about giving up their own lives in the sake of others in Europe. And so the government launched a conservative propaganda campaign, like with posters like this. Wake up, America, civilization calls every man, woman, and child. Here's some more. This is one of the more famous ones. Destroy this mad brute. Enlist. U.S. Army. This is an army poster. And for everyone watching it at third hour, I will send you guys just the slides on these if you want to look at them more clearly. Who's being characterized here? And that's not King Kong, by the way. That's not King Kong. King Kong movie hadn't come out yet. How young? Who do you think's being characterized as the mad brute? Which country? Huh? Yeah, which country is this? Who do you think the United States is trying to ask its people to destroy? Well, what country do we declare war on? Germany. Yeah. So portraying the Germans as brutes, as apes, and what do you notice on his cap? Militarism. Yeah, this was considered, like, at the time, this goes back to, like, Prussia. Like, old German military, like, leaders would wear these helmets with a spike. So this was how the United States is going. And what's the effort here? By portraying the Germans as a mad brute, stealing away the woman, in his arms. What effectively are the United States propaganda creators trying to turn the Germans into? That's a woman. It's not a mermaid. It looks like it could be a mermaid. That's a woman. What are the propaganda creators here in the United States Army? And we're going to get to who was leading this campaign. But by portraying the Germans like this, what's the intention? Bernardo, what do you think? Yeah, I mean, yes, you're right. It's the American Army that's created this poster. But a little bit more to it, perhaps. G? Okay, to arouse anti-German sentiment. Regina?
To show why we shouldn't stay neutral in the war, but instead go fight against
To fight the guerrilla, the German guerrilla. Okay? The last thought. Right. There's a reason it's a woman in here, first of all. Because who's going to go fight the war? The men. And so this noble sort of Prince Charming, and I'm not like being goofy on it, but the whole idea of the fairy tale, the prince always saves the princess, right? He saves her from the monster. And who's the monster in this case? The German brute. So enlist now, boys. Go save your princess, which is Europe in this case. But I think the point that you guys missed, and I'm going to give it to you just because of time, when you portray your enemy as a guerrilla, you take away what characteristics? Humanity. It's an attempt to dehumanize the enemy. Because after all, what is your primary job as a soldier in war? To kill. And so if you don't think of your enemy as human, you're more likely to pull that trigger. And I got news for you. The dehumanizing effects of propaganda campaigns like this carried over into American perceptions about Germans even after the war. This spilled over well into World War II as well. But this was a concerted effort. And who ran this effort? A man named George Creel, who is the head on the Committee of Public Information. There's a term in the name you absolutely want to get down. Everybody. George Creel was hired by the United States government. He had worked, I believe, in advertising to create some of these propaganda initiatives and these cartoons or these posters. And Creel's job was really to create a propaganda campaign that inspired the United States to get ready to mobilize. And he was given unlimited, his department, his organization, the Committee of Public Information, was given an unlimited amount of resources and power to create this wild propaganda and to spin a narrative that would help convince the American people that this was a just war, that this was a good fight. Do you see propaganda at all in society today when it comes to fighting wars? Or is this concept been obliterated from the way our government deals with foreign affairs? Ted?
Maybe like those Go Army commercials. You know, when sort of I'm talking about like where they have all the soldiers running around.
Yeah, the military commercials. The Marine one where the guy's like on the train, he's shaking hands with all these people, and then it's like, have you guys seen that one? We're taking a job interview, and he's like, so why should we hire you? And it's all these images of him doing Marine activities. And yeah, and there's the Army ones where they're like running around, it's teamwork, it's rah-rah. Then there's the one where the guy's like running towards the storm.
Yeah.
You ever been to like the movie theaters? I don't think you ever see like the Citizen Soldier campaigns? With like, who was that? Was it like Nickelback or did that song? No, there's a song. You guys are, maybe this was a couple of years ago. Now you're all looking at me weird. Good, we'll find me on live video for everyone to see how weird his references are. What? See. Yeah, it was a song. And they were like these ads before.
You should sing.
Oh, to sing it? Oh, no. No, absolutely not. I don't think it was Nickelback. I forget who it was, but there was like, before every movie, it would like be these advertisements to join the National Guard. And it had this like really like, rock and roll, edgy song called Citizen Soldier. Oh, look it up. Okay, so we see commercials on TV. Is that it? Is propaganda been reduced just to television?
Cartoons, well, the cartoons in the newspaper, like especially in North Korea, the way they like display them.
Okay, but is that propaganda in the sense that like we're urging the American people to join the army and or military?
It's just like to support the idea of like what everyone else.
Okay, so the way North Korea is constantly mocked in our media, our political cartoons, is sort of anti-North Korean propaganda. All right, I can buy that. Kiati?
We have more like propaganda like domestic affairs, not really like foreign affairs anymore. So, like Black Lives Matter, like that propaganda, and then.
Well, some people would argue that's not exactly propaganda. That's a legitimate cause. But I guess depending on your perspective, you could maybe view that as some of the propaganda that you use to arouse people to join that side. But yeah, there seems to be a lot of attention lately on American domestic affairs. Again, I know you're all too young, but 9/11, post 9/11, there was just a litany of ads and songs and public demonstrations that were geared towards, getting people behind the cause of the war on terror. And certainly with the results of Afghanistan and Iraq and other parts of the world, perhaps those propaganda measures have been diminished over the last couple of years. But it is hard for us in this day and age to understand the effects of the government creating an agency. There was no Committee of Public Information before World War I. So All of a sudden, we now have a government agency that's controlling and creating these advertisements to get people behind the war effort. This is a major aspect going on behind the scenes in World War I. Because you can't just snap your fingers, send your men to war. You've got to get the people behind it. Now, the other point I brought up was money. Money. And this plays into part of the Committee of Public Information's role, too. But how is the United States going to finance this war? We've talked about this as a technique for financing war already. Not the first time we've talked about this.
Government bonds.
Yeah, war bonds. Exactly. War bonds. This was an idea we talked about in the Revolutionary War. The idea that you could buy an investment that some people got very rich on in the Revolutionary War. You buy an investment in the war. You give the government your money with the idea that you get some sort of, I think the first bond drive was about 3% return. So after the war, you get your money back plus a little interest. And this is one way in which people were encouraged to support the war. Even little kids. Buy war savings banks. Very similar idea. Yeah.
You also use taxes.
Yeah, sure. You can raise taxes, and that almost always happens with a war. But the war bond drives, World War I in the 20th century wrote the playbook that World War II would try to borrow in terms of galvanizing the American people to support the war by fishing into their own pockets. And take this cartoon, for example. Who do you think this is trying to appeal to? Jessica, who do you think this is trying to appeal to?
The people who can't enlist, so maybe the women.
Okay, yeah, because women can't fight in the military. But it's definitely geared towards people who aren't going to do the fighting. So older people, women. Because after all, if you can't fight, how can you do your patriotic duty? Buy a bond. Buy a liberty bond, as they would call it. Defend your country with your dollars. And again, there's the cartoon, the propaganda. You've got the heroic, Herculean-looking American with the flag, sword. Liberty Loan is his shield to defend America. Was America under attack? Not really. But as we read in Wilson's speech, it's the ideals that are under attack. So, if you ever face questions on the APUSH test about how the United States financed the war, taxes raised, for sure, no doubt. But also the Liberty bonds. And the Liberty bond, war bond drives, there were new, I believe there were 5, I want to say, I'll have to double check that, but I want to say there were about 5 or 6 in World War I. And here's the one I wanted to end on, because this one goes back to Wilson's speech we read the other day. Check this one out for the second bond drive. Who's this one targeting? Irene? Yeah, immigrants. Because when most immigrants first arrived in the United States, in New York City, they checked in where? Maybe some of you guys have visited this place before? I know I did a couple times. Ratika? Ellis Island, New York, yeah. I still haven't forgiven my wife, by the way. For my birthday one year, we went and did a tour of Ellis Island. And she booked us to do, like, the top of the Statue of Liberty, which you had to walk, like, all the way up there. And if you're a little bit squeamish, like, in heights, which I kind of am, yeah, that's not a good idea. And there's no elevator to go to the very top. I mean, you get up to the top, and the thing's, like, shaking, and the Park Service guy, yeah, this is awesome, isn't it? Like, yeah. We had this, like, total, like, surfer bro accent. I'm just like, and he starts talking about how they had to, like, airlift people out of there, like, an extreme, I'm like, all right, we're getting down right now. Like, great view, here's the picture.
Why should
What?
you go through her head or to the torch?
You go, no, you go up to her crown. So you actually see out through the little gaps in her crown. Yeah. And it's not like an easy walk. It's straight up, like twirling stairs. Oh, I remember holding on to that thing so tight the way down, my arm was sore the next day. Yes?
Don't they like not allow you to do
You had to have special passes. You had to and they had to go through tons of security. Anyways, I know it's a little detour, and we're almost done with class and whatnot, but yeah, that really still, I'm like getting sweaty palms. It's the Empire State Building. It's the urban legend. If you drop a penny from the Empire State Building, you kill someone on the way down because it goes so fast. Look, we know from Wilson's neutrality speech that such a concern was the immigrant population in the United States. So, here's again how the American government reaches out to the immigrant population to gain their support. And look, again, if you can't fight, if you can't enlist, invest. Remember your first thrill of American liberty. Reminding people what it means to be American. That incentive is throughout all today's discussion and the propaganda posters and Wilson's speech and whatnot. But we still are faced with that task of fighting the war. No matter how well you finance the war through taxes or Liberty bonds, or you've got propaganda campaigns to raise America's interest in fighting, no matter what, you still need the men to fight. And so for the last 2 minutes, we'll hit this and we'll be out of here. So what is the United States going to enact in 1917 to help increase the number of military service members ready to fight? What will the United States go back to? The second time in its history. Izzy? Well, you could ask for volunteers and after the ruling list, and that's great. But that's not going to get you to the numbers that most likely you need. A military conscription, correct. So, in 1917, Woodrow Wilson and Congress passed the Selective Service Act of 1917. A military draft, forced conscription for the second time in U.S. history. The first time, of course, was when? Civil War. And which side, South or North, first enacted a draft? South. South had a draft early. The sentiment of every American mother, because that's what every American mother dressed like in 1916, apparently. 1917. Here's my boy, America. Here's my boy. Wait, what happened? Now you wear yoga pants all the time. Workout. What happened to that? It's 100 years ago. Look how women dress. Look how far moms have gone. Sentiments have gone in that 100 years. The name of the act? The Selective Service Act. Selective Service Act, which still exists today. Boys, when you're 18, you all have to sign up for that. Selective Service Act. Yeah, look, seriously, too, look at this guy. I mean, there's no way. Hold on, there's no way that guy looks any older than some of you. And look at how proper and nicely dressed and coiffed that hair is. I mean, look what you guys wear joggers for crying out loud. It's like joggers. What are those like dress pants? That's like we need to go back to this era, man. Look at that hairstyle. But you see the hairstyle? That's back. That's like the cool style now with the side part and. Listen, tomorrow we got the DDQ workshop. This goes for the other class too. So we got the DDQ workshop. Whenever we get done with that, we'll hop back to World War I. And we should be done with the war this Wednesday, and the DDQ test is Thursday. Okay? All right. So come ready for the workshop tomorrow. And I'll email the reading and with the tutoring announcement as well. I really hope that recorded the whole time.